They were not expecting to see you like that. Your soulmate recently came across something connected to your life, and for a moment, they did not know how to react. Maybe it was a picture, an update, a new achievement, a different environment, or simply a glimpse of the person you have become. Whatever it was, something about it made them stop and look twice. Because the version of you they saw was not the version they had been imagining. For a long time, they may have secretly believed that you were still somewhere in the past, still thinking about them, still wondering whether they would return. They may have assumed that no matter how much time passed, a part of you would remain exactly where they left you. But then they saw something that made that belief uncomfortable. You looked different. Your energy felt different. Your life appeared to be moving forward. And suddenly, they were forced to consider a possibility they never wanted to face. What if you had actually learned how to live without them? Imagine someone returning to a place they once believed would always be waiting for them, only to discover that the entire landscape has changed. The roads are different, the doors are different, and the person they expected to find standing there has already continued walking. That may be the feeling your soulmate experienced when they saw this part of your life. They may have tried to convince themselves it meant nothing, but something about it stayed in their mind. Because they did not just see an update about you. They saw evidence that time had been changing you while they were still holding on to an old version of who you were. And now they are beginning to wonder whether the person they once believed they could return to is still waiting for them at all. And now your soulmate may be trying to convince themselves that what they saw did not really mean anything. They may have looked at it once, then moved on with their day, pretending it was just another moment in your life. But something about it stayed with them. They may have returned to it later, looked again, and started noticing details they had not noticed the first time. The way you looked, the energy around you, the confidence in your presence, the life you appeared to be living. And slowly, an uncomfortable realization began to form inside them. You were not standing still. While they may have been holding on to an old image of you, you had been changing in ways they never expected. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed that you were still emotionally connected to the past in the same way they were. They may have assumed that if they ever decided to come back, you would still be there, still thinking about them, still wondering what could have happened between you. Maybe they believed the connection was simply paused. Maybe they thought time was giving both of you space, not realizing that time was also changing you. And now what they saw has challenged that entire belief. They may be wondering whether you still remember them the same way, whether you still think about the moments you shared, whether the person they once knew is still waiting somewhere inside the life you are living now. Imagine leaving a door open for years because you believe the person on the other side will always remain exactly where you left them, only to return one day and discover that the entire room has changed. The furniture is different, the atmosphere is different, and the person you expected to see is no longer waiting by the door. That may be what your soulmate is beginning to feel. They are not necessarily shocked that you are living your life. They are shocked because they may have secretly believed your life would always have space reserved for their return. And now they are seeing signs that you may have started filling that space with something else. Maybe it is your peace. Maybe it is your growth. Maybe it is a new chapter that does not revolve around the memories you once shared. This does not necessarily mean another person has entered your life. Sometimes the most frightening thing for someone who lost you is realizing that you no longer need anyone from your past to feel complete. Your soulmate may now be looking at you and wondering whether you finally healed from the pain they once caused. They may be asking themselves whether you have become too strong to accept the same treatment again. And perhaps this is why the discovery affected them so deeply. They were not prepared to see evidence that you had continued without them. They may have thought that your silence meant you were still waiting. They may have assumed that your distance meant you were hurt and would eventually return to the same emotional place. But now they are beginning to understand that silence can mean something else. Sometimes silence means a person is healing. Sometimes distance means they are rebuilding. Sometimes the absence of communication is not a sign that nothing is happening. It is a sign that everything is changing quietly. And your soulmate may now be realizing that while they were waiting for the perfect moment to return, you may have been creating a life where their return was no longer necessary. That thought may be difficult for them to accept, because they may still have feelings for you. They may still wonder about you. They may still believe that something between you was never truly finished. But now they are beginning to ask the question that changes everything. If they came back today, would you still want them the way you once did? And now your soulmate may be beginning to wonder whether there is someone else in your life. Not because they have definite proof, but because something about the way you appeared made them question whether your heart still belongs to the past. They may have seen you looking genuinely happy. They may have noticed a new person around you, a different energy, or simply a version of you that no longer looked emotionally trapped by what happened between you. And suddenly, a fear they had managed to avoid began rising inside them. What if you had finally moved on? What if someone else now makes you smile in ways they once did? What if you no longer think about them when you are alone? The thought may have affected them more deeply than they expected, because perhaps your soulmate always believed that even if you were not together, a part of you still belonged to them. They may have assumed that the connection between you remained unfinished, that there would always be time to return, explain everything, or find out whether the feelings were still there. But now, seeing your life change, they are beginning to understand that time does not wait for anyone. Imagine holding onto a key for years, believing it still opens the same door, only to discover that the locks have changed. The key still exists. The memories still exist. The connection may still exist somewhere inside you. But access is no longer guaranteed. That may be what your soulmate is afraid of now. They may not be terrified of another person specifically. They may be terrified that you have finally reached a place where you no longer need them to come back. And that realization can hurt more than jealousy. Because jealousy says someone else may have your attention, but fear says you may have become completely happy without me. Your soulmate may now be looking at your life and wondering whether the person they once knew is still there beneath all the changes. They may remember how deeply you once cared, how much you once wanted answers, how much emotional space this connection once occupied in your life. And now they are wondering whether you gave that space away. Maybe you did not replace them with another person. Maybe you replaced the waiting with peace. Maybe you replaced confusion with clarity. Maybe you simply became tired of hoping for someone who never made a clear decision about you. And now your soulmate is beginning to understand that people do not always lose someone in one dramatic moment. Sometimes they lose them slowly, every time they assume that person will always remain available. Every time they believe there will be another chance. Every time they choose silence because they think the other person will still be there tomorrow. Your soulmate may now be asking themselves whether they waited too long. Whether they underestimated how much you could change. Whether they assumed your feelings would remain frozen while they figured out what they wanted. And the most painful question may be the one they cannot answer. Did they lose you before they even realized they were losing you? Because what they saw about your life may have shown them something they were never prepared to accept. You are not standing in the same place they left you. You are moving forward. And now they are beginning to wonder whether someone else, or perhaps simply your own new life, has taken the place they once believed would always belong to them. And now your soulmate is beginning to understand what your absence actually cost them. For a long time, they may have believed that time was simply passing between you, as if everything could remain exactly where it was, until they finally decided what they wanted to do. They may have assumed that you would always be emotionally connected to the past, always curious about them, always leaving some invisible space open for their return. But what they are seeing now is forcing them to confront a much more painful reality. While they were waiting, hesitating, staying silent, or believing they still had unlimited time, you were changing. You were healing from things they may never have known about. You were learning how to live without the answers you once wanted from them. You were slowly becoming comfortable with a life that no longer depended on their presence. And now your soulmate may be realizing that the person they thought would always wait for them may have finally stopped waiting. They may be looking back at the moments when they could have reached out, but chose not to. The conversations they avoided, the opportunities they ignored, the times they convinced themselves that there would always be another chance. They thought your silence meant you were still waiting. They never realized your silence was teaching you how to stop waiting. That realization may be affecting them more than they expected, because now they are seeing the consequences of their absence. Maybe you once wanted them to notice your pain. Maybe you once wanted them to fight for the connection. Maybe you once hoped they would come back before you had to completely let go. But when someone waits for too long without receiving clarity, something inside them begins to change. The hope becomes exhaustion. The longing becomes acceptance. The questions become silence, and eventually the person who was once looking toward the past begins looking toward the future. Imagine leaving a garden unattended because you believe it will always remain exactly as you left it, only to return years later and discover that everything has grown in a completely different direction. Your soulmate may now be looking at your life and realizing that your growth happened during the time they were absent. You became stronger without their reassurance. You found peace without their explanation. You continued living without knowing whether they would ever return. And perhaps this is why what they saw affected them so deeply. They may have believed that your life was paused because of what happened between you. Now they are beginning to understand that you did not pause. You continued. You changed. You became someone who may no longer accept the same uncertainty you once tolerated. And that realization may bring regret, not necessarily because your soulmate never cared, but because they may now understand that caring is not always enough when someone repeatedly chooses not to act. They may be asking themselves whether they underestimated your strength, whether they believed you would always be emotionally available simply because the connection once meant so much to you. But people can love someone deeply and still eventually choose themselves. They can remember everything and still move forward. They can miss someone and still decide that returning to the past would cost too much. And now your soulmate may be facing the question they avoided for far too long. If they finally come back, will there still be a place for them in the life you built while they were gone? And now your soulmate may be facing the realization they never thought would become real. They may have seen something about your life that made them understand you are no longer standing in the same place where they left you. You are not waiting for the same answers. You are not living inside the same memories. You are not necessarily looking toward the past with the same hope you once had. And this is what may be frightening them the most. They may still have feelings for you. They may still think about what happened between you. They may still wonder whether there is a chance to reconnect. But now they are beginning to understand that wanting to return is not the same as having the right to return. Imagine standing outside a house you once called home and realizing that the lights are still on, but you no longer know whether you still have a key. That may be the emotional position your soulmate is now experiencing. They may look at your life and wonder whether there is still a place for them inside it. They may want to reach out, but fear that you will not respond the way you once would have. They may want to explain why they stayed away, but worry that their explanation has come too late. They may want to know whether you still care, but be afraid of discovering that you finally stopped. And perhaps this is the consequence they never expected. They did not suddenly lose you when they saw that your life had changed. They may have been losing access to you slowly every time they assumed you would always remain available. Every time they believed there would be another opportunity. Every time they chose silence because they thought you would still be there when they were finally ready. But you were changing during all of that time. You were learning how to stop looking for someone who was not choosing you clearly. You were learning how to create peace without waiting for an explanation. You were becoming someone who could remember the past without needing to return to it. And now your soulmate may finally be seeing the result of that transformation. They may not know whether someone else has your heart. They may not know whether you still think about them. But they know something has changed. They know the person they once had access to may no longer be available in the same way. And if they return now, they cannot simply expect the past to open its doors for them. They will have to meet the person you have become, not the person they remember. They will have to understand that time changed you. Your experiences changed you. Your healing changed you. And the version of you that once waited for them may have finally chosen to move forward. Sometimes one moment is enough to make someone realize how much time they wasted. Your soulmate recently saw something about your life that made them understand you may have continued without them. They thought they still had time. They thought you would always be there. They thought the connection would remain exactly where they left it. But now they are looking at your life and asking themselves the question they never expected to face. What if you did not just move on for now? What if you became someone they may never be able to get back?